Millions of people visit San Francisco every year to document a global icon. They come for the scale of the red pillars, the movement of the fog, and those perfectly timed sunsets that define the city's skyline. But few tourists look past the aesthetics toward the dark spaces beneath the span, the massive concrete supports, and the churning water that stays in deep shadow long after the sun has gone down. Daniel Carter was a professional photographer who made a living documenting the things others overlooked. While reviewing a series of sunset exposures, he found a detail that shouldn't have existed: a 30-foot, featureless black shape standing upright in the middle of the bay. There was no equipment in the water that could cast a shadow of that magnitude, and no natural explanation for a silhouette that remained pitch black even under the direct glow of the setting sun. Daniel had captured something that the human eye simply hadn't registered in the moment. Daniel returned to the bridge the next evening, assuming a second set of shadows would reveal a simple optical illusion. Instead, the shape appeared again. Only this time, it was no longer in the water. It was standing on the rocks, much closer to his tripod. The geography of the bridge soon became irrelevant. As Daniel moved through the city over the following days, the shape began appearing in every photo. It loomed in the background of crowded intersections and stood motionless in the reflections of passing storefronts. The entity was no longer tied to a landmark. By isolating that shape through his lens, Daniel had inadvertently shifted its focus. The creature wasn't haunting the Golden Gate anymore. It was following the man who had noticed it. In 1937 archives, Daniel found multiple reports of a dark figure wandering the unfinished suspension cables. Officials dismissed these sightings as high-altitude hallucinations. The rumors only stopped after the unexplained disappearance of 3 night shift workers who had been vocal about the shape. Historical accounts suggested a recurring pattern. The entity remains a passive, immobile shadow until perceived by an individual. The act of looking isn't one-sided. Once an observer singles out the shape, it gains the ability to move toward them. Daniel's professional habit of scanning the horizon for the perfect frame was likely the exact trigger. He hadn't just taken a photograph. He accidentally signaled to something waiting nearly a century for a new witness. The distance continued to shrink until the camera captured the impossible. In a photo taken inside his own apartment, the towering silhouette was standing directly behind him, so close its presence should have been physically felt. Then, the events in the photographs began to bleed into the physical room. Daniel heard heavy, rhythmic footsteps on the roof of his top-floor apartment. 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoed against his front door, though the hallway was empty. Beneath the door, a puddle of freezing seawater began to seep into his living room. The barrier between the lens and the world had collapsed. The entity was no longer just an image on a screen. It was now occupying the same physical space as Daniel. The final stage of the process was clear. Once the shadow reaches 0 distance in a photograph, its presence in the real world becomes inescapable. Daniel fled back to the bridge at midnight, hoping the origin point of the shadow held some way to reverse the connection. He found the shoreline engulfed in the thickest part of the fog, cutting off all sound from the city. As the bridge lights flickered and failed, the shadow materialized one final time. It was no longer a flat silhouette, but a giant of living darkness, with 2 glowing white eyes, standing directly in his path. Faster, more urgently. In the absolute darkness of the cliffs, Daniel performed one final instinctual act. He raised his camera and pressed the shutter. The blinding white flash illuminated the fog for a fraction of a second. But instead of scaring the creature away, the burst of light gave the shadow the exact conditions it needed to detach from the ground and merge with the person who was documenting it. By dawn, the shoreline was empty. Police found Daniel's camera, his backpack, and his shoes exactly where he had been standing. There was no evidence of a struggle, and no body was ever recovered from the bay. The camera's final photo showed a figure standing on the highest point of the bridge tower. It looks exactly like Daniel, but there is one glaring anomaly. In the bright morning sun, the figure casts no shadow on the metal surface beneath its feet. The entity doesn't destroy its victims. It consumes their identity, taking their place in the physical world while leaving the observer behind as nothing more than a hollowed-out image. Every day, tourists continue to flock to the cliffs. They smile and look into their lenses, never checking the deep shadows in the background of their selfies. But if you ever find a dark shape in your own photos that wasn't there when you took the shot, stop looking, because the moment you notice the shadow, it has already begun to move toward you.
Please subscribe my channel for more horror video like this.